Clearly, something has gone wrong here. What's happened here is that you and your opponent have chosen decks from different formats. Formats are generally used by card games to limit what cards are usable in tournaments, which generally covers cards printed in the last 2 to 3 years. In some games, like Magic, formats changing is just old sets come out, new sets come in, and the game continues more or less the same. With Wixoss, though, when the formats change, entire card mechanics start to change as well. There are much broader changes in Wixoss format switches, so knowing what you're looking for when you're going into playing a game of Wixoss is kind of important. Fortunately, Wixoss marks their format changes with small symbols in the bottom right of the cards. The classic format had no symbols at all. The key format had a key, and the Diva format has a triangle within a circle. So the original Wixoss format doesn't really have a name specifically, but we'll call it Classic to keep things simple. Classic doesn't really have a central defining gimmick like key cards or assist rigs that later formats have had, but if we generalize the nearly 4 years of card expansions that make up Classic, we can come up with a few main features. Rigs follow a common grow cost pattern. They cost 0 to grow to level 1, 1 to grow to level 2, 2 to grow to level 3, and then 3 to grow to level 4. This is the most important point, which we'll talk about in later formats, because it will change. The rigs tend to top out at level 4, and although level 5s exist and are an important part of gameplay, the transition from early game to mid game usually happens at level 4, and this is usually where a lot of the back and forth gameplay action is going to be taking place in. Level 5s are mostly used to give you a big final push at the end of the game. This means that while the early to mid game can be a bit slow and grindy, you're mostly building resources while chipping in for incremental damage here and there. The end game can be really explosive. It can end very quickly due to level 5s like Mayu, who gives the attacking player an extra turn, which means the opponent doesn't even get a chance to refill their Signy zones after the first attack, and arts like Phosphorescent Samsara, which lets a red Larig dodge guards, crush 3 life cloth per hit, and also attack twice, which means that if you're attacking while your opponent has 3 life cloth or less, you can probably end the game right there, and even if their life cloth is as high as 6, you can knock them down to 0 in a single attack. A lot of the gameplay in Classic is managing your Ener to consistently grow while maintaining your defenses against these big plays and trying to set up your own big play to end the game. Classic is also marked by cards that may have been slightly more powerful than intended. Nearly the entire ban list is populated with cards from this era, and there are also powerful cards that can be splashed in a variety of decks, like 3 Swords for Ener charging, 3 Out for card draw, and Daihoika as a powerful Signy that both draws cards and allows for easy banishing when it attacks. The next format is Key, which is named after the card type, also called Key. Key cards are played out of the Larig deck, and they provide an ongoing effect, unlike the one-and-done effects of arts. They have no Larig type restrictions, they are very powerful, and they cost little to no Ener. They instead use coins, which is a parallel resource generated by your Larig that can be used to play keys, boost the power of arts with a bet ability, and activate powerful Larig effects. Although coins were introduced in Classic to boost the power of Larigs from the Lost Storage anime, they are used by every Larig in Key. They're not just a specific gimmick for a small subsection of them. In addition to the parallel resource of coins, the grow cost of level 4 Larigs has been set to 0, and most Larigs don't have a level 5 option, which all combines to make some pretty big changes in gameplay. Games in Key lack the explosive finish of Classic, but tend to have more powerful game plans up until that point. There's less pressure on Ener resources and more powerful removal effects, meaning players are able to hit harder earlier, but they're also able to spare Ener for defensive effects earlier as well. Decks remain very focused on their specific Larig archetypes, but there are still plenty of opportunities for splashing in cards from other archetypes to help out your own game plan, especially in the Larig deck, since keys have no restrictions on who can use them, and are very universal tools. Gameplay is overall more even than Classic, with more early pressure, but less powerful finishing moves, and the power level of individual cards is more even as well, Unlike Classic, there were no bans at all in the key format, and only a single simultaneous use restriction, which restricts 2 cards from being played in the same deck. Key definitely made some changes to how Wixoss played, but they were minor compared to what changed with Diva format. Coins and keys are out. We're back to just using Enter as the only main resource, but that is definitely a very, very small change compared to all the other changes. Lurigs stop growing at level 3 now, not 4. No Lurig level 4s have been printed so far, and given how the rules are currently structured, it's unlikely they will in the future either. Signy have had their power bumped up by about 1 level to compensate for this lower grow limit, so the level 3s have about the power you would expect out of level 4s from the previous formats. However, this is not as huge a change as you would expect because the effects remain much more in line with what you would expect out of a level 3 rather than the more powerful effects you're used to seeing out of level 4s. Archetypes are more broadly accessible with restrictions by Lurig type, which were a key feature in narrowing down which Lurig could play which archetype in earlier formats. Those are mostly gone in Diva. Instead, the only real restriction, there's a few cards restricted to a specific team of Lurigs, but mostly it's just color restrictions. You can only use cards that are of the same color as your Lurigs. And again, that's Lurigs plural because the biggest change Diva has made is that you can now use 3 level 0 Lurigs, which seems huge, but it's not as crazy as it may seem at first. The 2 extra Lurigs, which are called Assist Lurigs, can't attack, and they grow following arts timings, so main phase, attack, and spell cut in, rather than growing during the grow phase, and so far they all have only on-play effects, which means in practice they act very similarly to arts, which are completely absent from Diva format. Level 2 Assist Lurigs do boost your limit by 1, however, so there is a small difference there. Now, if we've kind of gone through here and seen that these changes aren't quite as drastic as they might appear, especially the 3 Lurigs, when you first hear about that, you're probably going to be dropping your jaw, but it's not as crazy as it seems, but these do have very real effects on the gameplay. With Assist Lurigs, your arts now follow a specific Lurig grow pattern. Like normal Lurigs, you can't grow a Ray Assist into a Dr. Tamago Assist, for example. You can only grow her into another Ray. And you also have to move along a level progression, which means level 0, then level 1, and then level 2, and that's where Assist Lurigs stop. Furthermore, you're locked into using a level 1 effect and a level 2 effect, and level 1 effects are cheap, but there's very, very few defensive options there. So, while before you could play the arts Don't Move and then another defensive art, now if you want to use the equivalent of Don't Move in Diva format, you also have to play Draw 2 as one of your other arts slots. If your opponent is really good at memorizing card lists, they can also probably fairly reliably predict your defensive attack phase effects as soon as you reveal your level 0s, since each Lurig only has 2 to 3 level 2 assists available, and some don't even seem particularly playable. There's also only 1 Servant available in the format, Servant Sharp, which means you also only have 4 guard effects, while previous formats basically you could run as many guard effects as you wanted. You could even fill your entire deck with them if you so chose, although that was probably not a great idea, except for that one really weird time when colorless decks were absolutely destroying the meta. Between the low number of servants and the lack of defense out of the Lurig deck, and the fact that level 1 assists can help push damage, but almost none of them provide defense, means that games are much, much faster, damage happens much, much quicker, and overall I've found that Diva games can take as little as half the time as a normal game in older formats, which is theoretically great if you're trying to get more games in, but I have found that this does definitely have an impact on gameplay, specifically on the amount of relevant decisions that players need to be making. I found that in earlier formats it was much easier to nail down a specific game decision that resulted in the game going one way or the other. I've found that a little bit more difficult to do in Diva. It's not to say the games are bad by any stretch, the game still plays very, very well, but there is definitely some difference there, and the move to make for quicker games is not without consequences. One final quick note on formats is that there is All-Star format, which is basically the format that covers all formats. You can use cards from any of the formats in it, but I haven't played it a whole lot, and it's basically just a combination of all 3 formats. As near as I can tell, the All-Star metagame is currently very focused on cards from Classic, using cards from Key and Diva to make them even more efficient and powerful. So there you have it. Which format should you look into playing? All of them are just fine. I wouldn't really recommend one over the other, and Diva is going to be much easier to find because it is the most recent one. It's going to be a bit weird if you try and mix and match formats. For example, playing a Key deck against a Diva deck is going to lead to some pretty weird gameplay and might not line up all that well. But beyond that, each format has their own strengths and their own weaknesses. So I would just play whichever one you can get your hands on, and then after that, maybe look at exploring some of the other formats as well, because they are all quite good, each in their own way. So that is it for this video. If you have any comments, any questions about Wixoss formats, feel free to ask them down in the comments below. But until the next video, I will see you later.